DerbyCon this one time because, you know, that's what you do, and I'm speaking there. Oh, well, I'm just talking to these guys right now, but I can use that as well. Okay. Microphone. So, I was at DerbyCon, and I couldn't get my AV working. Fortunately, Adrian Crenshaw was able to jump in and actually assist me and fix this problem. But anyways, my name's Integgroll, and I'm going to talk about stopping your fighting of antivirus. It's something that I'm kind of passionate about for some strange reason. Anyways, I was a systems administrator with a development background. I hate the word or term DevOps. I don't know why, it seems odd to me, and it doesn't describe as well, I think. So I prefer administrator and development. It works better. Currently, I'm a penetration tester. I wrote Wharfwhacker, which none of you know what that is. If anybody knows what that is, please raise your hand. Okay, that's like 3 people. That's exciting because Wharfwhacker is the world's only, and if somebody else has written one, I'd love to hear about it, 2-factor authentication port knocking suite that's written in Python as a library. So you can take it and roll it into anything that you want and actually have it do 2-factor authentication port knocking for any of your actual anythings that's written in Python. I learned not too long after DerbyCon last year that I actually have a single user who's not me. Somebody emailed me and had me assist them getting this running. I don't know what they're doing with it. I don't really want to know, because if you're using stuff at that point, I'm also an avid curler, and by that I mean like the ice sport with the brooms and the big stones, the rocks, and all of that fun stuff. I love it. It's an exciting, fun time. I'm also a Luddite. And here's the definition of Luddite that I like to use here. It's a person opposed to increasing industrialization or new technology. And this quote actually is pretty accurate on this for my opinion of Luddite. And that is that I'm a small-minded Luddite resisting progress. And by this, it's not like I hate all technology or anything like that. Obviously, I hate setting up AV stuff. However, what I mean by that is things like home automation. That scares the shit out of me. I don't know about you guys, but I do not want that. Any sort of biometrics, that's another thing I'm not a fan of. I don't want that in this world. It's a terrible idea. But I hear new technologies like that, and it makes me kind of cringe a lot. But what it really makes me want to do is take these new technologies and put them into a box, and then put them into another box, mail that box to myself, and then smash it with a hammer. Now, to actually get into a little bit of the actual antivirus evasion part of this talk, I want to go back a little bit to Fred Cohen here. And Fred Cohen did some pretty interesting research about antivirus. In '84, he went and wrote a paper about viruses and how they actually affect the world and different things along those lines. And then 3 years later, he actually goes out and writes another paper and demonstrates that there's really no way that antivirus can detect and avoid anything and everything that we can write. So 3 years after he really starts looking into it, he realizes that it is a no-win game. It's not something that he can actually succeed at. And then in '89, 2 years later, he writes another paper about it and actually starts writing antivirus programs. So even though he saw the defeat in it, he realized that it is something that we kind of need, and as an industry and as everybody, and so it's something that we need to go with. Now, I'm going to tell you now the only actual antivirus evasion part of this talk, all right? I'm going to give you the exact secrets to avoiding antivirus. And they're write something new, don't recycle anyone else's code, don't tell anyone about it, and don't ever use it. And your stuff will bypass AV for the rest of time, as long as someone else does not write your code that you wrote, which is why you don't want to share it or recycle it or anything like that. Because usually what AV is picking up on nowadays is actual stubs from malware that's sitting around, other things of that sort. But in realizing all this kind of stuff that's going on, I can't really like just sit down and cancel this stuff out, because like I said, pen testing is my job. Obviously, Meterpreter is, wait, Mubix isn't in the audience, is he? Okay, good. Then I don't have to mispronounce it for his pleasure. So yeah, Meterpreter is my payload of choice. It's what I actually like to go with. But the biggest problem on that is that Meterpreter's kind of antivirus is bitch, in that almost any way that you have of automated through Metasploit without Pro, because I'm cheap, it's going to get caught by AV. So if I just go and PS exec across the network, AV is going to pick it up every single time because it's so used to it. So I have to set a custom exe or do anything else, run it through a different program, and do goofy things like that. That's not always like the way I like to do it. I would like to just be able to send a payload and have it work, especially while I'm on a pen test. But some of the common bypass tricks on that, if you want to actually make that happen, is to rewrite the stager on it so that it actually accepts a different way or does it a little bit differently. And then you have all the stuff nowadays that's doing memory injection using some language that's, not what they're expecting, or somebody's encrypting and then decrypting it on the other side and injecting it through memory that way. Memory injection is really hot right now. For good reason. It works really well, and it tends to bypass a lot of antivirus. However, it's not always getting caught right now, but I think part of the reason for that is that the AV industry and different companies as a whole are kind of waiting until they have that problem as a whole solved, because they see that as this one thing that once they solve that problem, all of that goes away. And so they're not hitting on things individually as it gets incremented upon, at least not as much as I'm noticing. So yeah, why am I here? So I'm going to tell you a little story about a pen test that I was on a little while back. And what ended up happening with this pen test is I was working in this company through their organization, and I noticed that they had a ESX server that was open. So I went ahead and downloaded vSphere and did all that stuff so I could actually interact with it. Typed in the default password, it worked. Saw that they had a bunch of VMs running. Saw that they had a VM template that they were using. So downloaded the VM template, set it up locally, booted Backtrack on top of it, well, Kali at the time, on top of it, took the hash out of it, and then just started passing the hash to the admin hash that it had left on the box because they didn't change it to all those different boxes. So while the authentication was properly working, it actually had semantic endpoint protection set up that was really well set up. And so while I sat there and tried a bunch of different AV bypass methods that I had, it took me a little bit to actually realize what it was picking up on, and it wasn't necessarily some of the antivirus. It was actually the point where my memory was going from just being writable or readable or rewritable to where it actually would click over to being executable. And whenever it did that, it would actually just delete the payload that I had loaded. So that would go away, and I would no longer have that there. Conveniently, to do any sort of memory injection, especially with like Metasploit, to get Meterpreter on there, you kind of need to have executable memory to make it really easy. So it's not something that, could just magically have it happen. I did eventually find a solution for this, but I will talk about it later on, because everything else that I did, I beat my head against the wall for hours on this, and it made me very embarrassed, because I got the chance to steal entire operating systems from them, but I didn't get the chance to actually get in there and really do anything nitty-gritty until the last couple minutes, or what felt like the last couple minutes. So what that really means for us is that antivirus is getting a little bit better over time. It's, it's not going to happen today or tomorrow. I really think that Meterpreter's days are numbered. There's going to come a time where the antivirus industry is going to essentially have it nailed down, because Meterpreter, as awesome as it is, it doesn't change a whole lot. Most of the new stuff that comes into Meterpreter gets thrown in as additional modules that you load after the fact and not the actual delivery system. And so that's one of those things that we're going to have to work around. We don't really have an option of doing that forever. So we got to do something about it. Now, what do we do here? Now, you'll notice that this is a picture of the Alan Parsons Project. And I have this here because they have a song, Time, and I think that time flows like a river, much like they do. Exactly. So I like to look back whenever I'm thinking about these things like that as to what I actually, how can I solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions? And the thing that I find about it is if we look back to the labor movement, we can actually find a really good solution for this, I think. For example, back then they were dealing with problems of having really long hours, shitty pay, they didn't have any job security, and the work that they were doing was pretty damn hazardous. And it wasn't a good work environment for anyone. These people were getting screwed over, while the people that were, up there were making big money and didn't really care about it. So people ended up banding together on this. And I can imagine the first conversation that actually happened with this, where a guy walks into the office, and he's looking at his boss, he's got his hat in his hand, and he's just, well, if he can afford a hat. So his imaginary hat. And he's talking to his boss, he's like, hey, listen, we've got to do something about this. I'm not making enough money to actually survive here. And, that's not a good thing because I'm never home to see my family. Why do I have any of this? Why am I working this job? And his boss kind of looks at him and says, yeah, you're fired. So that doesn't really help him at all. So he's got this organization that wants nothing to do with him, much like I think the antivirus industry is with our industry. And I'll explain a little bit into that in a little bit. And so what had to end up happening is everyone had to get together on this. So they had to get as many people as they could into collective bargaining groups, basically, and unions, to actually go to their bosses all at once and say, listen, you've got effectively two choices. And they are either A, we stop the work here, or B, you guys actually listen to what we're saying and help to adjust some of these things. And it didn't happen all overnight. If you'll look back, there were a bunch of different laws that happened. For example, some of the fat cats had made happen that ended up making collective bargaining illegal for a little while. Unions weren't legal. And then all of a sudden they were back. And then things started to trickle after that, slowly. So they got it reduced down from like a 16 to a 12-hour day down to like a 10-hour day. And then they got a minimum wage thrown in. And then they got the 10-hour day thrown back down to an 8-hour day, which is where we are now. Well, not in this industry, but that's because those extra hours we do on top usually. It's like, we just love it. And so, while that whole time it's not all sunshine and rainbows, they still got some things to go and move in a direction that actually really helped them out and helped everyone out at that point. Because the whole economy of the world went up like that. When Britain did it, when we did it, everything went out better. However, there's this other group of people that the other definition of Luddite, in fact, the #1 definition whenever you Google for it, and that would be a member of bands of English workers who destroyed machinery, especially in cotton and woolen mills, that they believed were threatening their jobs. And the Luddites basically, along with a couple of other riot incidents, hindered the labor movement. They made a lot of the people look like they weren't organized. They made a lot of the people that actually were there and caring about what was going on and trying to make a difference look like idiots who nobody cared about. Because when you come in and you have this group of people that looks, and they've got their ducks in a row, but you have 3 people somewhere else who are burning shit down, if they're burning things down, this other group, if they're associated with them at all, they all look bad. And everyone actually is the problem then, and no one's going to deal with them. And so these Luddite kind of acts of smashing looms was a problem. It really, like I said, hindered the labor movement. And while I was talking to a previous coworker about this, and this is my exact point here, he gave me this quote: "The only way to make antivirus vendors know their product is a joke is to embarrass them." Now, I'm not putting his name up there on purpose, because I think this is actually a really poor quote to attribute to someone. Because I think it's really short-sighted. It sounds very much of the Luddite way, in that the only way that we're going to make this work is to shut them down as much and as often as possible and make none of this work for them. And by doing that, then they will listen to us, which is not the case. That's not how it's going to work. It's not how it's worked, obviously. Because if that was the case, the first time anybody had an antivirus bypass that worked, they would have already listened to us. They would have already been, oh, well, we need to work on that, rather than just updating signatures and dealing with it. And another part of this big problem here is, well, I'll explain in a second, but I worked at Staples for a while, and Staples sells laptops. Now, Staples has this grading system where they go based on the number of loyalty programs that you sell, and the number of protection plans that you sell for laptops, as well as the number of accessories that you sell with laptops. And by accessories, that includes the protection plan, so that's really cool if you can get that. That's a bonus accessory. It also includes things like mice. It includes things like Microsoft Office, the backup disks that come with it, and conveniently enough, antivirus. Now, when you're in a store at Staples, the biggest metric for wanting to sell these things and making sure that every single person walks away with it is the amount of time that your boss will spend yelling at you otherwise if you do not. So to reduce that time, it usually ends up that you're increasing the amount of time that you're wasting of your customers to actually get these products into their hands. So you have a bunch of these people that are working in places like Staples and Best Buy and all these other organizations that are purposely handing the antivirus out to people. And so antivirus companies are still making sales. And much like this guy, the embarrassment that you're causing them does not matter. They don't care. They're still in the race. They're still making money. And they're still going to keep running because they don't have to change. So obviously, where am I really going with this? What am I actually talking about at this point is kind of what's going on. I love the gigantic moons. It's kind of just fun. But this right here is a list of the features that come with semantic endpoint protection right now. And I'm hitting on them right now because that's the one that I've had the biggest problem with, really. But if you notice at the bottom, I mean, they've got stuff for Mac and Linux. That's kind of cool. They have stuff for virtualization features. But that thing at the very bottom is the thing that interests me. They have a centralized and granular policy management system. So what that means is that they have a server sitting there somewhere or some sort of service that is controlling all of this stuff in the background. Okay? So it actually sits there and it reports on things, it actually talks to the stuff, it updates the virus signatures, all of that kind of stuff. And it's really helpful for your client and for your customer and all of that, and really for security as a whole, because I won't say otherwise, because antivirus is not a bad thing. It's annoying for me, but it's not a bad thing overall. It could be better, but that's something we need to work on. So what's going on here is basically I have a solution program for this. And one of them is that we need to work with antivirus vendors to set up a system of like bug bounties, basically. This is very much exactly that same thing. I'm stealing the hell out of it. And so basically, as you find a way to get Meterpreter running on a system in whatever antivirus, at that point you should be able to go to that antivirus vendor, say, this is the method that I'm using, this is how we'd like to buy, or this is how I'm bypassing it. And whenever they realize that it works and whatnot, they throw money in your direction. Now, this works great as long as they continue to keep this faith, and we do the same thing. So we don't have problems like Facebook not paying out their researchers because they misfollowed something and somebody didn't listen to them. And so we actually had to go as a community and pay this person. Another thing that we have to do in this is set up a system to where penetration testing isn't actually stopped. Because if we do end up sending constant antivirus bypasses to AV vendors, what's going to end up happening is they're just going to apply them and apply them and apply them, and then we're not able to do penetration testing, or we're not able to do it as effectively as we should be able to. And the third thing is that we need to continue to do our bypass research through the bounty processes. So we need to actually go and continue to do this stuff, continue to research it, and work with them to make their product better, and in turn end up making security better. Now the second step, it looks a little funny. It's kind of like the underwear gnomes here. But I've got a few ideas for how to make that second step work. And one of them is kind of a centralized alert and approve. So what ends up happening is during a penetration test, they've got somebody who sits in their NOC or their SOC or wherever they happen to actually be, and kind of sits there and waits for the alerts and clicks OK whenever they actually happen. It's not ideal. And if they actually decide, oh, that's a system that they're allowed to do things on with Meterpreter or whatever, it's not the ideal solution, but it is a solution that could work. Another thing that we could do is actually do straight out application whitelisting. So I hand them my payload, and they plug it into their centralized server, and any time that it sees that payload, it just says, okay, we're not going to execute anything on it. We're going to let that go. Also not ideal. A lot of the reason is that I don't want them to have that payload because it may still be that they have other things in place that they're going to hate on. And it also informs probably just more people in the industry or the organization that I'm doing a penetration test on than really need to know what's going Another slight problem. I have a third idea here that I've come up with, which is a cert code, or cert signing. And we're going to go into that here. So basically, whenever it comes down to certs, we know that SSL certs for websites are iffy at best as to how that works. But it's not the cert's fault on that. Certs are great for what they're doing. The real problem at that point is actually the chain of trust that goes with the certs. Been well established. Code signing certs kind of have some of the same problems. But in this kind of situation, code signing certs are perfect for what I'm talking about doing, because it's something that I can assign to any payload that I have, so it doesn't just have to be Meterpreter, it doesn't just have to be this other piece of code that I'm trying to run. It can be any of these different executables that I'm talking about. And I'm only talking about touching disk on this. I'm not actually talking about buffer overflows or anything like that, because that is something that I don't see a way to catch that with antivirus very easily. It's not something that won't work, or that'll work without slowing things down way too much. But for this, I'm talking essentially PS exec. So I'm sending the payload over, it gets written to disk, AV checks it, deletes it, basically most of the time. But with this, what it ends up letting you do is sign your code, send it over through PS exec. At this point, it can check the certificate that's actually loaded up on there. So antivirus checks out the cert, checks out the dates that are on the cert. If it's correct and it's inside the system, then it goes ahead and lets the code run, as long as the dates are also accurate. And then, when the dates are wrong, or afterwards, AV will go through and check and delete that anyways. So your files go away when your penetration test is done. When you no longer have an ROE on that organization, it's over. And it also, like it says, lets you do multiple types of payloads. Now, as I've been telling a bunch of different people about this, they thought I was idiotic, which is basically common response number one. You're an idiot. To which, yeah, pretty much. So another one that I get is this is very common, is you're a penetration tester. Your job is to break into my systems and then tell me about it later. And I really wish that it was my job to walk in, break your systems, drop a mic, and walk out, because that'd be awesome. It really would be. Oh, that'd be a great day. But really what my job is to come in and check out your organization. Yes, find your exploits that may be there, find vulnerabilities that are on your systems. Get in there and find and demonstrate an impact as to what's actually going on, to how I can make this look good for your organization, to where fixing these security problems is a good solution for you. And at the same time, not waste my time trying, or your time really, trying to find more impact and find more vulnerabilities on your systems by trying to bypass antivirus, which is something that is effectively, we know, is bypassable. I mean, as it's already stated, somebody's going to find a way to get around it, because I can always just write something new. Meterpreter just happens to be the best tool to use because I've only got a week to do it in. But if I want to write custom software to come screw your agency over, I could do it. It's not the end of the world for me. So that's basically what all that is. And the cert solution came to my mind because what I ended up finding was the only way to bypass SEP at this point was to actually sign the code that I was sending over there with just any signature. Because that was really what was going on, is it was checking the executable and saying, well, I've never seen this executable before, so I don't think I want to let it have executable memory. That's not a good thing, apparently. So it didn't allow that. Clipped it the second that it happened. There were two ways that I got around it. One was signing the code, and the other one was actually kind of goofy. I set the memory as read-write, wrote to the memory, told the memory to go away, and then set it back as read-execute, and in the same spot, and that actually caused it to work as well, which shouldn't have. The third response is the one that I actually never get, and that is, how can I help? I wish that you're different. A little bit. So one of the things I'd like to do is I would like to talk to as many antivirus vendors about this kind of stuff that I can, and get one, if not all of those different things set up to help make their product better. Because it's not the worst thing that we could have. We could just have no AV solution at all, and then everyone would be screwed. But as we continue to help and actually work with the organizations and make things better for them, their product gets better, our customers get better, everyone's threshold goes up, and that's a good thing, I think. Stop using VirusTotal is another great idea, because you are effectively doing a bug bounty program with VirusTotal, but you aren't getting paid for your work at that point. So you're straight out just giving them free payloads that they can go and check and know what's going on, especially with the number of them that get thrown that just have an interpreter in them. So go in, I go to a new pen test, my freaking AV bypasses don't work anymore, and I have to waste another 6 hours of my customer's time, or my free time, which I'm probably going to spend on it anyways, but that's not the point, to actually get this stuff working. And the other thing that's really important here is if you look at the way that dealing with organizations like that work, there are two huge departments that have the biggest amount of push whenever it comes to antivirus or anything like that. And they are marketing and sales. They get the most anything from all of those organizations. And so if you really want something to go through, from what I've noticed, and something to change, you actually need to go and bug the sales guys and say, hey, this is something that I heard talked about. Do you guys have anything like that in your pipeline? Are you actually doing something like that? Now, 90% of the time, you're going to get something back saying, well, yeah, that's in the next version, of course. So just buy this one now, and then we'll roll that over in the next one whenever it happens. So that's something that is iffy, but still that 10% that can get through, as more and more people do it, the more they'll start to actually pay attention to it. So if anybody does have any antivirus contacts, I would love to have them shared and to hear as much about them as possible, because I'd love to talk to these people. Somebody that I can't really, well, I haven't been successful anyways. It's just, hey, I need a meeting. It doesn't really work like that. So yeah, you can contact me through Twitter at Integgroll. You can get me at integgroll@gmail.com. I'll be around, and as Andre on the league says, try the veal, child. Now, I have something that I would like to do to kind of ceremoniously set the whole thing to where we're not going to be Luddites anymore. At least I'm not going to be a Luddite in the primary definition. So I'm not just going to walk around and smash looms anymore. I wanted to get a loom up here so everyone could come take a swing at it. But the problem with that is that looms are expensive and really hard to move. And so getting it up here without a ramp and a forklift and other things would not be an easy thing to do. So I instead decided that I could just bash something that actually comes from a loom, right? Because that's kind of like the same thing. Except bashing clothing really isn't that interesting at all. In fact, it pretty much makes no sense. However, I got a savior here, all right? There's a company, all right, called Fruit of the Loom. And fruit is something I can smash. And I have a watermelon. And I have a baseball bat. Well, I was going to do it right over here. Where would you like me to do it? Works for me.